Hello, today's Bible study comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 5 through 11. And it reads as follows. If anyone has caused grief, he has not so much grieved me as he has grieved all of you to some extent. Not to put it too severely, the punishment inflicted on him by the majority is sufficient. Now instead you ought to forgive and comfort him, so that you will not be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. I urge you, therefore, to reaffirm your love for him. Another reason I wrote you was to see if you would stand the test and be obedient in everything. Anyone you forgive, I also forgive. And what I have forgiven, if there was anything to forgive, I have forgiven in the sight of Christ for your sake, in order that Satan might not outwit us, for we are not unaware of his schemes. Amen. Ooh, man. Okay, now you hear Paul is talking to the Corinthians about forgiveness, and it was to forgive the brothers who had sinned. And if you look, it says, if anyone has caused grief, um, and Paul is talking to him just like he is ministering to him, like he is, they are his sheep that he is over, and he's talking about more than likely a specific person among these Corinthians because he says, if anyone has caused you grief, so it's got to be somebody in that group. He doesn't say exactly who it is, but it's somebody in that group. And I'm sure, just like we should be and don't want to be, we don't want to put anybody on blast. We don't want to scream out, this is the person that did me wrong. But we do want it to be known, hey, something occurred. And if anyone has caused grief, Paul is talking to that person. And if you really take a peek at it, it is probably going back to First Corinthians when Paul had spoke of the man back then when they had to confront him back in First Corinthians, and he said, "Hey, I understand they sinned against you, okay? But if anyone has caused you grief, he has not grieved me." And he said, "It didn't come against me. He has not come to me and done anything. His offenses were not directed at me." That so this man, this person, Paul did tell him to confront back in First Corinthians. But don't be severe about this. And the church has its disciplinary actions and what it does. And Paul had told them what they were. But he said he got it. Okay? Don't be too severe. This punishment which was inflicted as past tense. It means he received it by the majority, meaning the group, the church, is something we might not like, sufficient for such a man. It's sufficient. So what he's saying is, hey, that's done. And you got to forgive him and comfort this man still. You do not want him to leave the fold. You do not want him to go away. You were So Paul is telling him, hey, don't be severe. He already got the punishment and it was sufficient. Now we got to work on the part that's hard for us, the forgiveness and the comforting of our actions. Um, and remember, Paul went after them back in First Corinthians when they, you know, went after this man and had their attitudes were towards this man. And Paul said, hey, remember he rebuked them. Now forgive and comfort him. As much as that man did wrong, they were wrong for not doing the forgive and comfort part. When you hold that away from a person, they don't get restored to who they are or who they were, because you got this noose sitting on their neck, choking them every time for the same thing. And Paul is saying, you're just as wrong as he is, because he repented. And once he repented, it was over. And one thing about the Corinthians, if you remember, hey, they would go one way or the other. Sometimes they were real strong, sometimes they were real easy. Remember in First Corinthians, Paul was talking about how they accepted this huge sin against God, accepted this sin, and it was no big deal. And that was nonchalant. And then they went extreme on something that was minor. So they are just as guilty and just as wrong as not for not forgiving this man. Lest perhaps such a one be swallowed up with too much sorrow. Now, if you want to be pig-headed or stubborn, um, and not forgive this man, if you don't forgive him and restore him, then you can be at risk of harming him and causing him, and it says it there, causing him, lest perhaps such a one be swallowed up. That's the man that you didn't forgive. Lest one be swallowed up with too much sorrow. You harm him. We cause harm when we don't forgive. Let the man do his sin. Okay? He did his sin. Forgive him of his sin. We all gonna make a mistake. We all gonna fall short. Sorrow is for sin. But our restoration, our forgiveness works towards the sinners. And it is and this is something Paul puts out there that we seem to forget. It is just as important as rebuking the sin. Forgiving the sin is just as important as rebuking the sin. So they were just as much as fault as he was at the time in forgiveness. Amen.